Hi, I'm Brenda Miller, the designer of the Among Brenda's Quilts pattern line. Today I'd like to introduce you to a new multi-size quilt made up of two simple blocks. It's called the Piccadilly Quilt, and in this tutorial I'm going to demonstrate how easy it is to make. Share my tips with your customers to improve their skill level so they come back to your store time and again. The Piccadilly Quilt uses pre-cuts from Hoffman, California fabrics. Remember, if you are a sewer, if you are teaching a class, that the use of pre-cuts will drastically reduce the time it takes to cut and make a quilt. Your students will also be guaranteed a finished quilt with a successful blend of vibrant colors. When teaching the Piccadilly Quilt, set aside 2 to 3 hour blocks of time for your classes. You're going to need to schedule 4 classes. In class 1, you'll be doing the cutting and demonstration of the basic block. Class 2, you'll work on the sashing block and sewing the sashing together and sewing the main block rows together. Class 3, join the rows to create the quilt center. Class 4, you will teach them how to add their borders and sew binding strips together. So let's look at the basic block. It's a 4-patch with a log cabin surround. 5-inch Bali snaps are arranged so that there are 2 darker values and 2 lighter values. Now this is a great time to introduce the idea of color value to your class. Have them view their colors through a red filter to help them with this concept. So now we're going to just start sewing our 4 patches together for our block, and this is a great time to explain the need for a 1/4 inch seam with everyone. Check out everybody's sewing foot to make sure that they truly are 1/4 inch feet. Because quilt blocks, of course, will never fit together without an accurate seam. Now demonstrate the need for scrap fabric when starting the seam. Most sewers don't use this technique, and this is a spot where we often get into trouble because we start our seam too narrow or too wide, and that of course is going to affect your piecing in the end and how your blocks fit together. So this is a very simple step that can really improve piecing accuracy. Proper pressing is really important, so let's show your students how to do it right so they develop excellent skills. So first of all, no steam or that'll distort the seams. Dark side up if you're pressing towards the dark side. Press it flat to sink the stitches and peel it open and press into the seam. Don't drop the iron on the fabric and hope for the best. So here's our basic 4 patch, and now I'm just going to pin the 2 sides on and sew them down, pressing out, and then we're going to sew the longer pieces on the other ends and press out. I always tell your students to sew their patches together with the seamier side up because they don't want to have their seams twisted by having them at the bottom and not seeing what's going on. And there you go. And now we're on to class 2, where we are going to build the sashing block. So here are all the components of the sashing block. We have our Bali pop cut, and we are using a dark blue called Moonstruck just to give it a little punch, and all this goes together so to make our sashing block. So let's do that. So we're going to sew our little strip in the center with this baby Lockley. This is actually a really wonderful piece of machine, as well as an embroidery machine. So it is very multitasking. Has great stadium lighting and a really big bed to work with, so we never feel cramped up. We are just going to press this towards light this time rather than the dark. And you just have to be kind of accurate with that to keep it nice and straight. And here's our opposite side. We're pressing into the seam. I'm just going to add these 2 end pieces of the Moonstruck fabric, and our sashing block will be complete. We're still in class 2, and we built our main sashing block. We built our main block in class 1, and now in class 2 we're going to join the 2 together to make rows. And here's just a row that you can see here on my diagram of what you're going to be putting together. And you'll also be having the students make their alternate rows by sewing the 5-inch Bali snaps between sashing strips. And there's our alternate row. Have a roll of masking tape on hand in Class 3 so your students can label their rows and arrange them so that the color pleases them. Class 4 is all about borders, so we've got our border strips cut and we're going to join all the borders together into one long strip on the diagonal and then trim them to the exact size I've given you in the pattern. Have them join their strips together on the diagonal with right sides together, making sure that no salvage is part of that border, so you don't want to see that. That's what you need. There's no point in people buying nice fabric in order to show off the salvage later on. That's a friction pen I'm using there, and that's a great item to sell. It irons away and leaves a nice line here for me to sew on so I don't get lost in the middle of my stitching. It's important to sew fabrics together on the diagonal for borders when they're plainer. This dark line from the friction pen, I can remove it with the heat of my iron. And I just see my purpley thread now. Now we've got to trim our excess off, so we lay a 1/4 inch line of our ruler right on top of the stitching. And trim that off. And then we're going to press that to one side. All of our border strips are joined on the diagonal, and then they are actually cut to size to fit the center of the quilt. Consider this our quilt and this our border, and this is what you're going to show your students how to do. We've cut our border to size. It will fit the exact center of the quilt. What you need to do is get a couple of pins, fold your quilt in half to find the center of the side. Just put a little finger crease in there. And it, of course, is at visual center too. If this is our border, we want to fold it in half as well and find its center. Okay, so we have 2 center points. We put right sides together, center to center, and we pin in the center. Then we're going to pin on either corner. Don't worry about this right now. And then we're going to pin in between to fit. Now your fit should be pretty good. You might have a little tiny bit of stretching to do. The piecing should be accurate because you've shown your students how to do a good job. And there we go. Now, some people like to take their finished border and start pinning from one side to the other. Don't do that, it's never going to fit. Always pin in the middle, side to side, and then pin to fit. Here's our finished full-size quilt. The Piccadilly quilt can also be made in baby, lap, king, and queen size. So if you're a store looking for a quilt to use as a class experience, this is a 4-step procedure with minimal piecing, minimal matching, and great results. Thanks for joining me. I'm Brenda Miller from Among Brenda's Quilts.